I thought it was just the wind, until I heard my own voice whispering from the trees. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the wind in those tall pines. But it wasn't the wind, it was the whisper. It sounded exactly like my own voice, begging me to come back inside. But the real terror didn't start until my little brother, Sam, grabbed my arm and asked, "Ben, why do you keep shouting at the trees?" I need you to understand that we weren't just running from a memory. We were running from a void. 6 months ago, my younger brother Sam and I lost our parents in a sudden, tragic car accident that left the silence in our lives absolute. The city became a graveyard. We felt untethered, carrying a grief that was already too heavy. Then, 3 days after Christmas, our childhood home burned down. It was ruled a faulty wire, a tragic random accident, the investigators told us. But Sam and I knew the truth that only we shared. We had left the old space heater on in the living room, a careless mistake made in our days of grief. We never told anyone. We just carried that shared, silent guilt, a weight so heavy it made it hard to breathe in the city air. We used a small insurance payout to lease the cheapest, most isolated place we could find, a small, Ephraim cabin in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. It was miles up a winding dirt road, surrounded by nothing but ancient, towering Douglas firs. The silence was the main draw. It was deafening thick, pure, and absolute. It was exactly what we needed to heal, I told myself. For the first month, it was perfect. We were just two brothers, learning to cook again, learning to sleep through the night. Sam, who was only 19, started sketching the trees. I started hiking the logging trails. The guilt was still there, but the silence was pressing it down, making it manageable. Our closest neighbor, an old man named Mr. Hemlock, lived about a mile down the trail. I only saw him once, when I first moved in. He was a stern, weathered man with cloudy blue eyes, and he didn't say much. He just nodded when I introduced myself, and then turned back to chopping wood. A perfect neighbor, I thought, one who understood the value of being left alone. The strangeness began in the second month. It started with the whispers. I was hiking a trail about a mile from the cabin. It was late afternoon. The sun was dropping fast, and the air was dead still. That's when I heard it, a faint, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering over rock. I stopped. The sound continued, weaving through the trees. It was a melody, a tune I recognized instantly. It was the old lullaby my mother used to sing to us. "Hush now, don't you cry. Who's there?" I shouted, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. The whistling stopped. Just dead air. I ran back to the cabin, locking the door behind me, my heart hammering. I told Sam what I heard. He just shrugged, not looking up from his sketchbook. "It's the wind, Ben," he said, his voice flat. "Wind in the pines sounds like whistling. You know that." I told myself he was right. I was just tired, stressed, and my mind was playing tricks on me, dragging up old memories. But a few days later, it happened again. This time, I was washing dishes, looking out the kitchen window toward the dense woods. I heard the lullaby again, faint, clear, and coming from the trees right at our property line. I stared at the trees. I thought I saw a flicker of movement. Maybe the old man, Mr. Hemlock, walking his property line. "He must have a radio on," I said aloud to Sam, who was reading on the couch. "What's that?" he asked. "The whistling. It's that old man. He must be listening to an oldie station," I said, trying to rationalize the sound. "I don't hear anything, Ben," Sam replied, turning a page. "You're obsessing. Just let it go." The paranoia took root. I started watching Mr. Hemlock's cabin. I'd walk the trail near his property, looking for signs. His cabin was always dark. His woodpile never changed. The expected story here is that I find the old man. I confront him, and he turns out to be the source. A lonely old man or a psycho. I wish to God that's what happened. But the truth is much worse. I decided to confront him. I walked down the trail and knocked on his heavy oak door. He didn't answer. I knocked again, harder. Mr. Hemlock, I know you're in there. I need to talk to you about the music. I yelled. The door creaked open. Mr. Hemlock stood there, looking confused, his cloudy eyes squinting at me. I need you to turn the music down, I said, my voice shaking with adrenaline. He just stared at me. He cupped his hand to his ear and leaned forward. What's that, son? You'll have to speak up. I don't hear so well, he shouted back. I pointed toward my cabin. The music, the whistling. You need to stop it. He frowned, then reached up and tapped the side of his head, right behind his ear. He pulled out a large, flesh-colored device. My hearing aids? He yelled. Batteries are dead. Haven't heard a thing all day. Not the wind, not you, not a thing. I just stood there, frozen. The blood drained from my face. He was profoundly deaf. He wasn't the source. He couldn't be. The whistling wasn't coming from a radio. I apologized, mumbled something about a mistake, and walked back to the cabin. The fear was different now. It was no longer a solvable problem. It was an impossible one. When I got back, Sam was standing on the porch, staring into the woods, his face pale. What's wrong? I asked him, my voice barely a whisper. You heard it too, didn't you? He asked, not looking at me. The lullaby. It just stopped. This was the first time he acknowledged it. The sound wasn't just in my head. The whispers changed that night. They were no longer the lullaby. They were words. We were sitting in the living room, the silence between us thick and heavy. You left the heater on. The voice was faint, coming from the chimney flue. It sounded like dry leaves and static. Sam and I looked at each other, eyes wide with terror. Did you? I started. It knows, Sam whispered, his voice cracking. Ben, it knows what we did? The whispers became constant. They didn't just come from the woods anymore. They came from the plumbing when the water ran. They came from the static between radio stations. They came from the air vents. They were no longer accusations. They were conversations. It wasn't your fault, Ben. You were just cold, Sam. The whispers were using our voices. Sometimes mine, sometimes Sam's. The forest was learning us, absorbing our guilt, and playing it back to us in a soothing, terrifying loop. We were trapped. We couldn't leave the cabin because the whispers were everywhere outside. We couldn't stay inside because the whispers were in the walls. We were being psychologically dismantled by an enemy we couldn't see, one that knew our deepest, darkest secret. This is the part you're expecting. We go to the police. They find a hidden speaker system. The landlord was a creep. That's not what happened. The gaslighting turned outward. We had to drive into town for supplies. We hadn't spoken to another human in 3 weeks. We were both thin, shaky, and terrified of sound. We walked into the small-town grocery store. The cashier, a young woman, smiled at us as we put our items on the belt. Find everything okay? She asked, her voice cheerful. Yes, thank you, I muttered, avoiding eye contact. She scanned the milk, the bread, and then she paused, looking at Sam. Her smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. Don't worry, Sam, she whispered, her voice suddenly dropping to that dry, static hiss. It really wasn't your fault. You were just cold. Sam dropped the basket. Cans clattered across the floor. We stared at her. The cashier just blinked, her normal smile returning. Whoops, dropped those, huh? That'll be 2040. We didn't take the groceries. We ran from the store, jumped in the truck, and sped back toward the cabin. It wasn't just the woods anymore. The whisper had spread. It had infected the town. The cashier had said the exact words the vent had spoken to Sam the night before. This is when the memory from the hook happens. When we got back, I ran into the woods, screaming at the trees to leave us alone. I was shouting, crying, throwing rocks at the silent trunks. Sam ran after me, grabbing my arm. His face was twisted in a terror I had never seen before. "Ben, stop!" He screamed, shaking me. "Why are you shouting like that?" "I'm not." I yelled back. "It's the whispers. They're using my voice." Sam looked at me, his eyes wide and uncomprehending. "What whispers, Ben?" "I don't hear anything but you. You've been shouting at the trees for 10 minutes. You're scaring me." I stopped. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The whispers I was hearing, he couldn't hear them. And the whispers he was hearing, I couldn't hear those. The woods weren't broadcasting one secret. They were broadcasting our individual guilt directly into our own heads. The cashier hadn't been whispering to Sam. She had been whispering to me, using Sam's name. The forest was turning us against each other, making each of us believe the other was going insane. We are no longer united by a shared secret. We are isolated by a personalized one. I'm hiding in the truck now. Sam is locked in the cabin. I can see him through the window, walking in circles, holding his head, talking to the walls. He thinks I've lost my mind, and I'm sitting out here, listening to the woods whisper to me, using Sam's voice. "He's going to hurt you, Ben. He blames you for the fire. You have to leave him here. The entity in these woods doesn't need a body. It doesn't need a ghost. It just needs a secret. And it's feeding on ours until there's nothing left but the echo. I don't know if I can save my brother, because I can't even trust the sound of his voice anymore.